Good afternoon, ladies as well as gentlemen. Papa Boris here with some more Pathfinder. Tragically, Adventure Deck 3 is still weeks away from being released, so I cannot continue with my dream team. Thus, I figured it would be time to start a new run with The Rejects. So in this playthrough, I'm going to play with the 5 characters that I didn't use in my dream team run. If you want to see me play well with characters I like, go ahead and check that run out. Here we're going to go ahead and play with the dregs. So who does that mean? Well, I'm going to be playing with Kira Knightley, Sione Vio, Valeros Jenkins, the Chinese halfling Tai Chi master Lem Ing, and of course everybody's favorite monk, Pat Sejan. So no real choice in who I'm playing, obviously, because I'm just playing everyone I didn't pick before, but let me just briefly go over the characters and talk about their strengths and weaknesses, just so that contributes to the strategy component of this video. Let's start with Kira. So Kira has a D12 Wisdom and a D6 plus 2 melee skill as her main stats. Obviously the D6 plus 2 melee is a little bit on the low side. It's like pretty tragically on the low side. So if you compare her to the Barbarian, who has a D12 plus 2, she's like 3 behind. She's also 3 behind the Warrior, and she's 1 behind the Paladin. Sela. The Paladin, Sela, though, she can also add a d6 to her combat checks. Kira doesn't have any way to boost her combat checks besides playing Blessings. So her combat is a little bit low if you use Strength. So you're thinking, okay, fine. I'll just be a Wisdom Blaster Master person. Well, the problem is if you look at the cards list, she's got only 3 spells. Maximum 5, so it's a bit difficult to be a blaster, and doing that would mean you don't have any room for utilities. I mean, she's a cleric, she's obviously going to have a cure spell. If you're spending the rest of your spell slots on combat stuff, then you're just not going to ever have any utility spells, so no auguries, or anything like that. So it's a tough choice which way you go with. However, there's some good sides. Oh, and also there's some bad sides to her. She's got only 1 item, only 1 ally. Lots of blessings is good, but she doesn't really contribute much to the party for holding on to special allies or special items. So you're really in kind of a tough spot with her. You obviously want some more spell slots, and then you want to get these item and allies at some point, probably. But of course, more blessings is always nice, and on top of that, if you are playing a melee person, you're going to have to add more weapons at some point. So it's really tough. She really kind of wants everything except for armors, which nobody ever wants. So that's a tough thing about the character. Let's look at the powers. So she starts with a hand size of 5, which is pretty good for someone who's in melee. She's really pretty much the only melee character in the game that starts with a hand size of more than 4, so that is nice. She doesn't have weapon proficiency, but she does have armor proficiency. However, weapon proficiency is the more important one, so that's a bit lame. Her starting skill here is Heal. What you can do is, instead of your first exploration, you can basically treat any divine card as a cure card. Of course, the key thing about that is you lose your first exploration on a turn, meaning that you don't get to explore, unless you discard an ally or a blessing. So you're basically losing a turn to heal. This is fine in a 2-player game, or obviously a solo game, but in a 5 or 6-player game, it's not fine. So I'm almost never going to be using this. Kira is my least favorite character in the game to use in big parties. I'd really only ever want her in a party of 2. 3 is pushing it, and I'm pretty much never going to be using this ability in a party of 4. I mean, it's just losing a turn is too much. Her other ability is Undead Lore, and what this does is gives her a bonus d8 and the magic trait whenever she's fighting a Bane that has the Undead trait. It's one of those things, it's a very well-designed conditional power. It only applies some of the time, but when it does apply, it's incredibly useful. Because when she is one of the only characters in the game that can, built-in, take down ghosts and specters, which require the magic trait. Those are undead. There's also Adventure Deck 2, which has a strong undead theme with lots of undead henchmen and undead villains. She's also the only character in the game who can beat Aisha Foxglove, so if you remember that from Foul Misgivings in my other playthrough, there's some useful to this. Obviously, it's just nice to have every once in a while when you bump into an undead monster. Helps make up for some of her low combat abilities. So that's Kira. I'm not that jazzed about her, but the one thing I want to mention that is really good about her is this D12 in Wisdom. Wisdom is the most important stat in the game, in my opinion, for closing locations, and also for avoiding a lot of bad things happening to you. So just having a regular old D12, even if you don't put any skill feats in it, is just really strong all game. Next up is Sione, the Sorceress. So she's very similar to Ezrin. Ezrin is a D12 combat stat with Arcane plus 2 under it and another skill. She has Charisma. Obviously for Ezrin that was Intelligence. Charisma is more valuable than Intelligence. Ezrin's backup skill was knowledge. Hers is diplomacy. Diplomacy is way more valuable. So just in terms of stats, she kind of beats Ezrin a little bit. Now Ezrin has a D8 on wisdom. She has a D8 dexterity. Ezrin wins on that because wisdom is generally more useful than dexterity, but dexterity is still a leg up above strength, constitution, and intelligence in terms of general usefulness. So Sione's stats are actually pretty solid here. Excuse me, I couldn't swallow. Her extra stats are actually pretty solid here, I said. Ahem. Now, the main issue with Sione is regardless, she only has 3 spells, which is pretty pathetic for an arcane user. She doesn't have any weapons or armors, which is fine. Ezrin has a card slot devoted to weapon, which is just a waste. Like, it would just be better if he had another spell slot and took an extra combat spell. So she's better in that regard. Because she has so few spell slots, she does have a lot of room for allies, blessings, and items. But she doesn't have any way to heal herself, so you do have to be careful. 9/15ths, alright, what is that? 60% of her deck is discardable cards, so she can very easily kill herself just by playing her cards. She's one of the few characters who actually just basically kills herself if all she does is just discard her cards, and she'll gradually die. So she's a good pairing with good healing characters, which I have in this party. So Kira and Lem both have heals. Obviously, Kira's built-in heal you don't particularly want to use, but they're both divine casters, so it's nice to have Sione in a pair with some divine folks to heal her up after she's played all of her crap. And her powers are very interesting. So she has a hand size of 6, typical for a caster. And then she has these 2 skills. So Magic in the Blood I'll talk about first. What this does is it automatically recharges her spells. So that's very good, obviously. And she can upgrade that to automatically recharge items with the arcane trait as well as spells. So that's really cool. Ezrin does get a power feats that give him a bonus to recharge, but obviously a bonus is not as good as just starting with all recharges being automatic. So Sione beats Ezrin on this front. Then she has Arcane Blast. What she can do here is she can basically treat any card in her hand as an inflict. It's a little bit different from Inflict. Inflict doesn't have the fire trait. This Arcane Blast does, which is sometimes better, sometimes worse. But the point is, any card in your hand can be a combat spell that adds a d6 plus your arcane die. That's decent. It means that the junk that she picks up in the course of the scenario can be turned into fireballs, which is nice. It also means that she's always ready. She's never caught with her pants down. Doesn't matter if she has an attack spell or not. She can always turn into a fireball. And she can take a couple of power feats here to improve it, going up to d6 plus 1, and eventually a d6 plus 2 if she so desires. And that's all that there is to say about her powers. Let's take a look at her, wait, I already looked at everything. Right. Okay, so the basic issue is that unlike Ezrin, who has 8 spell slots, she only has 3. So she gets to automatically recharge her spells, but she doesn't have that many spells. So a big priority for Sione is to get up here on spells. Once she has 6 spells, she's a much stronger character. It does take a while to get up to 3 card feats, but that's a really, really big breaking point for her. At that point, she becomes incredibly, incredibly strong. Okay, next up, Valeros the Warrior. So I chose Amiri over him in the original game that I played. He's a pretty straightforward character. He's got a lot of weapons, a lot of armor, some items and allies, and a few blessings. He has, like, fewer blessings than I think anybody in the game except for Ezrin. 3 is a bit on the low side, so he's a bit... He wouldn't mind having a bit more extra explores, but it's all in all pretty balanced. No ones here. I'd rather lose 1 armor for anything else, but hey, he's a warrior, so we gotta give it to him. Nothing special there. For powers, alright, he starts with a hand size of 4, he has all the proficiencies, as a warrior should, and he's got teamwork. So any character at his location gets a d4 bonus to their combat checks. Not Valeros himself, that's the word another character right here, indicating he doesn't apply the bonus to himself, but it's nice to have him at the same location. Problem with that is, in a large game, you don't want to put people in the same location generally, because you'd much rather spread out and increase your odds of cornering the villain if somebody encounters the villain accidentally. In a small game, where, like, let's say in a 2-player game, you can pretty much just, like, have both people go to location 1, close it, go to location 2, close it, go to location 3, close it. Now location 4 is the only location, both of you go there, kill the villain, the end. So you can play that way in a 2-player game, maybe even a 3-player game, but in a 5-6-player game, you really can't play that way. The other problem is that, as you'll see in a moment, Valeros is pretty much only good at killing things. He's not good at anything else. So it's kind of weird. You don't really want somebody at his location killing monsters, because that means Valeros could have killed the monster if the other person hadn't been there. So you're like stealing monsters from Valeros by being at his location, which is bad. So it's a bit of a weird ability. It kind of seems simple on the surface, but strategically doesn't work very well in a large player game. And it sort of is like a non-bow with Valero's fundamental attribute, which is good at killing monsters, bad at everything else. So I'm not a big fan, but we'll have to use that because we do have some weak combat characters here. Lem and Kira, and to a lesser extent Sione, can all have trouble hitting big combat checks. Then we have Weapon Master, which is a very, very good skill. All right, and I'm not going to have any beef on this one. He recharges weapons instead of discarding them. So this is actually really cool. It means that, first of all, unlike most fighters, he can cycle through his deck pretty effectively because he's recharging his weapons all the time. And, of course, it also means he gets really, really big combat checks, just as a matter of course, from the get-go. So he's very, very solid at killing monsters, and he cycles through his deck pretty quickly. So that's just great. Let's take a look at his skills. He has a D10 plus 3 for melee. This is on average equivalent to the Barbarian's D12 plus 2. I personally think this is both better and worse. It's better because you typically would rather have a low minimum than a higher maximum. So D10 plus 3 and D12 plus, or sorry, D10 plus 3 and D12 plus 2 have the same average, but the D10 version has a lower minimum, the D12 version has a higher maximum, but lower minimums are more valuable. Because typically, the level of challenge that you're facing is you need not to roll well, you just need to not roll badly. And it's harder to roll badly when your minimum's higher. However, when he is facing a really tough check and blessings get played, of course, when your die is higher, you get more value from blessings. So Amiri gains an extra +1 against Valeros for each blessing that is played on their combat checks. He's a very physical guy. He's got D8 for dexterity and constitution. So this is fine. There are a lot of dexterity and, to a lesser extent, constitution checks in the game, so it's just nice to have some high dice. The real problem is this D4 wisdom. Ouch. He's the only character in the game with a D4 on wisdom, and it's just bad. This is the most important skill in the game, just on average, and having a D4 is just gonna, feel like being kicked in the balls over and over and over and over again. Frankly, I think a fighter needs to be perceptive. A fighter needs to, understand his surroundings. That's wisdom. So I think he should have had a D6 for wisdom and a D4 for intelligence. I guess that would have made him too similar to Amiri, and maybe they just wanted a character in the set who was really unwise. Frankly, alright, I'm gonna go on a tangent. I'm just gonna freaking do it. Alright, I think, if you ask me, that the rogue should have had a D4 for wisdom and a D6 for intelligence, because rogues are cunning and smart, but I guess she's an elf, and they had to give her the perception skill, so they chose to give her a D6, but that would have been my choice, personally, for who gets the D4 wisdom. So anyway, he has that, and it sucks. He does get compensated a little bit with this diplomacy on D6 plus 2, but it's not really that high. And also, in this particular party, I have both of the other diplomacy monkeys, Lem and Sione, both have really good diplomacy. So actually, in this party, I have all three characters with the diplomacy skill. So it's a bit redundant. Still, every now and then it helps him get an extra exploration out of an ally he finds, but it's nothing super special. So that's his skills, powers, and card list. On to our next character, Lem. Lem, in my opinion, is the most complicated character in the game. He's the hardest to play correctly. He's also, in my opinion, the hardest to plan out strategically as far as feats. So let's take a look at his stats. He's got a D10 for charisma and a D8 for dexterity. And you might be thinking, wait a minute. Doesn't Sione have a D8 dexterity and a D12 charisma, with other stats being identical? D6 for, or D4 for strength and D6 for the other three? Indeed, compared to Sione, he's just losing a point of die. So this is the thematic, bard, jack of all trades, master of nothing. He just flat out has one less stat die than pretty much every other character in the game. I haven't checked them all, so I probably should have before making this video, but I believe that every character has like a total higher number of die faces than Lem does by one. Unless Sione is unusually high, which I don't think she is. So that's a little bit of a kick in the balls, kicking his halfling balls right off the gate. He does have a lot of skills, so knowledge, not the most useful, but it sometimes does come up. So since Linny and Ezrin are the other two knowledge people, it's, I guess, kind of nice that we've got Lem here for that. He has 3 skills under one roof, and these are all useful skills. So it's not like Mariziel, who has a bunch of crappy skills under dexterity. No, these are all useful, like Arcane, Divine, Diplomacy, they all come up a lot. So it's nice to have them all under one roof, and that does compensate somewhat for having a crappier stat distribution. The problem with Lem is, how do you fight? Okay, let's take a look at his cards. You've got one weapon, and Lem's has this cool ability, which is that he can choose what his favorite card type is. He can choose any card as his favorite type. So pretty much what like 99% of Lem players do is they always choose weapon as their favorite card type, and they always start the game with a weapon in their hand. But how good is he with a weapon, right? If you give him a crossbow, he's rolling 2d8. That's an average of 9. That's not going to bring down anything. Even if you have him get a d4 from being in the same location as Valeros, that's only going to put him at 11.5. That's not high enough to confidently kill a gecko, which is a check of 8, and it doesn't get any easier than that. So he's just not very strong when it comes to using weapons, because he doesn't have any built-in bonuses to dexterity. He doesn't have the ranged skill. Now, he could, of course, use arcane spells to fight. Then it's not so bad. It's a d10 plus 2d4 plus 1. That's 5 plus 5.5, which is 11.5, which is 12.5. Still not super confident on killing anything, but, you know, at least if he's with Valeros, then all of a sudden it goes up to a decent level. We're looking at a 14 check, which is fairly solid. But, of course, if he's using combat spells to attack, he's only got 4 spell slots. He has the arcane and divine skills, so one of them is obviously going to be cure. So he's pretty much going to have to use up all of his spell slots to fill up with combat spells. Then, like Kira, he's not going to have any room for utility spells, and the problem with that is his weapon in hand is just a dead card, and on top of that, when he does run out of combat spells, which he eventually will, because he doesn't have that many, he's going to have to use his weapon, and then the weapon's going to be even worse, because he's choosing not to put any skill feats into charisma. So this is a very, very difficult decision to make as Lem. It doesn't matter in the beginning, of course. In the beginning, it's all the same. But when you get your skill feats, do you put him in dexterity to make his crossbow better, but still terrible? Or do you put them into charisma to make his combat checks better with spells and increase his mastery of arcane, diplomacy, and divine, which is useful for closing locations? But if you choose to go for the spells, then when he does have to use a weapon, he's worse off, and he's not going to be able to use utility spells, because he's going to have to fill up pretty much his entire spell list with combat spells. Eventually, you know, when he gets up to 6 spells, he can, you know, have, let's say, 3 combat spells, and then a cure, and then, like, 2 utility spells, but that's a long time coming. You have to beat the first 2 adventures to get your second card feat. So it's a tough decision. And for me, I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to choose it. We're going to see how this party plays out and then decide by ear. Because, of course, until the skill feats come in, you don't have to make any choices. You can just do whatever you want. Since there's no skill feats beefing up either weapons or spells until you beat Black Fang's dungeon. Now, I haven't looked at his powers yet, so let's actually do that. He has a hand size of 6, which is actually really good. He has the option for light armor and weapon proficiency, but he doesn't start with either. Note that he's going to be forced to take one of these 2, which is a bit of a jip. He doesn't really want either of these things, so it sucks that he has to put a power feat into them. Then his main skill is Bardic Performance. So basically what he can do is recharge a card to add a d4 to a check attempted by another character at his location. He cannot use it on himself, but he can use this on any check. So unlike Valeros, who adds a d4 to combat checks for free, Lem has to spend a card, he has to recharge a card, but he can apply it to any check. So that's actually really strong. But again, this makes him better in a small game than in a big game. In a small game, he can just hang out with his buddy, and they can just hang out together all the time. In a big game, you don't really want to pair characters together because you want to spread them out to temp close locations. So it's harder to use this ability. Strategically, it's just less sound to use it in a big player game. Furthermore, Lem does have to recharge a card to use this, so the more that you use it, the more likely you are to have to recharge away your allies and blessings at some point. And once you do that, you're not getting extra explorations, which, again, doesn't really matter that much in a small player game, but in a big player game, recharging away exploring cards does matter, because it potentially slows you down. Another problem with Lem in a small player game is that in a small player game, he has a lot of skills. He has Arcane, Diplomacy, and Divine, all under a stat that he can boost reasonably with skill feats. So his versatility is really, really useful, and being able to help somebody take on anything is also really useful. But in a large player game, you've probably got all your bases covered. You don't need to, like, shore up weaknesses necessarily, because unless you picked a stupid party, you should have just about everything covered, and you should have somebody good at everything. So his ability to add a d4 to anything becomes less valuable. So these are all reasons why I think Lem is better in a small game than in a big game. His own versatility and his ability to impart versatility to his allies matter a lot more in a small player game than in a big one. And in a big game, the fact that he just sucks at combat is a much, much bigger hindrance. He's also got versatile performance, which is a pretty complex skill. At the start of your turn, you can discard a card, and then from your discard pile, take a card of the same type and put it in your hand. So most people do with this is they use Cure, they don't recharge it, so now there's a Cure in their discard. They pick up a spell, they discard that spell, and they get Cure back. So that's like Lem 101. But there's so much more that you can do with this, so a really great player, which I'm not saying I am, but really what a really great player can do is be thinking about Lem's discard pile at all times, and at the start of his turn, asking himself, is there anything here that I can use to great effect? So I'll try to use this whenever possible, because you can use it with any card type, and there's lots of opportunities for clever play, but this is something that makes Lem very challenging. In my home game, the player who played Lem, player who chose Lem at the very beginning, it was a 6-player game that we took about a year to complete, Rise of the Runelords. The player who chose Lem was like definitely the least gamey player at the table. She was like the least gamery out of all of us, and I like silently face palmed myself when she picked Lem because I was like, no, please pick anyone else. So anyway, she never ever used the versatile performance. I don't think she used it like a single time in the entire year that we played, and I just wanted to cry. Basically, it doesn't look like it's that big of a deal, but there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with it. So definitely don't pick Lem unless you're planning to try to make the most of this. Because it really does add a lot to his power, and he needs all the help he can get. He's got some issues, as I've talked about. Okay, last character, Pat Sejan, the monk. So the monk has very interesting skills. He doesn't have any d4s. He's actually, like Lem, got a d10 and a d8, but unlike Lem, the rest are d6s. So he has the same total stats as all the other characters. It's just distributed in a way so that he has no horrible weaknesses, which is cool. It means he's always got a chance at everything. He has the acrobatics and fortitude skills, neither of which are that great, so who cares? But the all-around stats, the d8 in wisdom, the d10 in dexterity, these are the two most useful skills to have a high die in. Wisdom is better than dexterity, of course, but as you'll see, he needs the dexterity for combat. This just makes his stat array incredibly good. Let's take a little look at his powers next. So his hand size is 4, which sucks. He's got unarmed strike. So what this means is that when he makes a combat check, he can use his dexterity skill. Normally, you'd have to use your strength skill, but he cannot play weapon on the check. So basically, he punches things with his fists, and for that, he gets to roll his d10s on dexterity instead of d6s for strength. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward, and you might think, oh, I bet I can, like, with these power feats, add +1, +2 to my checks? No. So the first one lets him add the magic trait to it. The second one lets him add the fire trait to it. He's going to be forced to take one of these. He's going to be forced to take the magic strike, and that sucks. It's another case of a character getting kind of gypped, because, yeah, it's cool if he finds a specter, but most of the time, another power feat would have been stronger. Now, the really important skill he has is not this, because throwing a d10 at monsters ain't going to be that effective. This is what makes Sejan Sejan. He can play any number of blessings on his own combat checks. Normally, you can only play one card per check, per type. So you can only play one blessing, one ally, one item, etc. He can play any number of blessings, and they are recharged instead of discarded. So he can throw a ton of dice down. He's like the ultimate villain killer in this game, better than the Barbarian, better than Valeros. It's not uncommon for him to be throwing 4 or 5 d10s by the end of things, with a nice, skill feat boost on dexterity, of course. So he's great at fighting single monsters. The weakness, of course, is that if your hand doesn't have that many blessings in it, your inspiration is a bit limited. And if you have to fight 2 monsters in a row, say a villain has 2 combat checks, or you have to kill a henchman and then the location's closing requirement is to kill another monster, you have to be very, very careful how you distribute your blessings. And of course, at the start of the game with a hand size of 4, you don't have that much leeway. So he becomes a lot stronger once his hand size improves. Eventually, with the roll card, he can get up to 7. Once he gets up there, he really just becomes one of the most overpowered characters in the game. But until then, he's a little bit reined in by his small hand size. So he's a bit of an investment character in that sense. Now, the card list is really interesting. He doesn't have any weapons, spells, or armors, so he's just complete item ally blessing. And these blessings, of course, very important. He has more blessings than anybody because he uses them to beef up his combat checks. And your first 2 card feats are almost certainly going to be blessings, so that he has a higher concentration of blessings in his deck. I would have liked to see 4 allies and 3 items, sort of the other way around, because items are bad in the beginning, and it's really difficult to come up with items for Sejan that aren't just clogging his hand, sitting there uselessly. Typically, Staff of Minor Healing, Spyglass, these like good, on-use, draw them and use them right away items, go to Sejan first, because he doesn't even want them in his deck, he doesn't want them in his hand, they're just clogging up space. So, that's a little bit of a weakness, but whatever, it balances the character out. And eventually, having a high arm item spot does help, because eventually we do start finding a lot of good items. Okay, so I think that's all we have to do. Let's go ahead and take a look at the time. Do I have time to build my decks? Yeah, it's been 25 minutes, so we'll make this on par with the other character creation video that people can just skip if they don't care. So let's go ahead and build our starting decks, because you really want to, unless you want to just handicap yourself. Let's start with Kira. There's no reason for her to have a quarterstaff. Quarterstaffs just suck. Remember, she doesn't have weapon proficiency, so the only weapon that really makes any sense for her is the mace. Gives her a solid D8 to use alongside her combat check. Let's do Valeros' weapons as well. So, I don't know why he starts with a dagger. This is a ranged weapon. Yeah, you can discard it to add a D4 to your combat check if you're using another weapon. But if this is the only weapon in your hand, then you're screwed. And on top of that, does he really need another D4 in his combat checks? He's fine. So let's get rid of this, get rid of that. So him, you could take maces just to be safe against skeletons, which are the henchmen in the third scenario. In my opinion, it's a little bit short-sighted, because that's the only thing it really matters for, and he should just have as high combat checks as possible. So I really want as many long swords as possible, and I'm only taking another a mace just because that's all I've run out of. Or I've run out of long swords, and that's all I can do. Okay, so these are the only people with weapons besides Lem, but this is one of the things that the game actually gets right. Yes, light crossbow is the ideal weapon for him to have. Next, I'm going to skip spells because those are going to be complicated. Let's do armors. Kira has heavy armor proficiency, so there's no reason for her to take shields, because shields suck. Let's just take chainmail. Valeros, we've got a bit of a problem. We're actually out of chainmail. The next one is rusted, so it cannot be buried to block all the damage. So I will just take a leather armor, because I think being able to bury it to block all the damage is better than being able to recharge it for an extra protection. Sione, Vlem, and Sejan all do not have armor, so that's all we have to do for armor. Let's go ahead now and pop back to spells. So, for Kira, they gave her just some garbage spells. It's just a disgrace how shitty this bullshit is. I'm going to get rid of this crap, and I'm just going to give her a couple of inflicts. Where's inflict? Hello? Inflict? Doop. And I'm just going to give her 2 of them. So, I'm going to have to make a decision later whether to put skill feats in wisdom and take up all their spell slots with combat spells and not have as much room in my decks for utility, or whether to knock out these inflicts, rely on her weapons, and put in some utility spot. But for now, I'm just going to put those in. She's going to do better damage, hit better checks with this than with her weapons, so I might as well just have it, because starting spells are so bad. For Sione, I'm going to do something that might seem a little bit naive. I'm just going to give her 3 combat spells, and I'm going to give her all lightning touches, because it doesn't matter, and lightning touch is the cooler animation. You might say, well, Boris, wait a minute. Doesn't she have the ability to discard a card for a spell? So why would you give her combat spells? Just give her utility stuff. Well, here's why. First of all, I don't want to discard any more cards than I have to, because she's got 4 allies and 5 blessings, so she's already going to be doing a lot of discarding for extra explorations and just, playing her blessings. It's pretty much the only way they get played is they get discarded. So I don't want to discard spells too. Second of all, these spells are better than her fireball ability, because they're a 2d4 instead of a d6. What you could do is you could take invisibility. This does have its uses. And using invisibility, like, if it's relevant in the scenario, you can use it. Otherwise, you can turn it into a fireball. Or I'll do that just for some variety, I guess, in case anyone's angry. That is what she started with, is the invisibility. Otherwise, just taking a lot of combat spells with her is fine. And then, someday I may even regret that I have this invisibility and rolled a d6 instead of 2d4. So we'll see. So Lem, I'm going to keep it pretty simple with him. I'm going to get rid of all this crap. I'm going to give him 1 cure and 3 combat spells. So lightning, and I guess we're out of those, so let's do force missile. So there's a couple things you could consider here. So eloquence is interesting. This is good for him and for Sione, so I could take that, and this is Arcane and Divine, so it's a pretty decent utility spell for anyone in my party to have, because they could help Lem and Sione. I'm not going to commit to it yet, though, because I would really just rather have the highest combat checks possible, especially since the first scenario, Brigand Doom, is so combat heavy. The 7 locations in that scenario are just so filled with monsters, it's ridiculous. So just having as many combat spells as possible, I think, is more important right now than having some utility spells. Later on, yeah, I might branch out. I might, dump a missile for Eloquence or for another good spell. If I happen to find Augury, somebody's gonna dump a card to get Augury. So later on, I'll have to do that. But in your initial deck creation in a big party with these characters, I think that just being very naive and just filling up your casters with combat spells is fine, since there's so much fighting to do, and the value of the utility spells available initially is just so marginal. Okay, that's all my spells. We did armors already, let's do items. So Kira starts with Holy Water, which is hilariously bad. The reason she starts with it is it has the Divine trait, which means that it can be discarded for her healing ability, her healing hero power. Problem, of course, is I'm planning to never use that, so instead of this, I'm going to go ahead and give her Caltrops, just in case she finds something and doesn't have a weapon or a combat spell in hand. You could also do Thieves' Tools, which is worth considering because there is that second scenario. She has a D4 for Dexterity, so having Thieves' Tools is good, so she can at least get rid of those poison traps. What I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to just give 2 Thieves' Tools to Sejan, because Sejan, I don't know who thought giving him potions was a good idea. It's risky. I'm probably going to end up just forcibly dumping one of these tools. But look at the available items. There's just like nothing here that you can play on pickup. I guess there's Blast Stone, but that's just so bad it hurts. So it's just rough. It's just rough and tumble. I'm going to give him a pair of Caltrops as well, so that he can just blow them up to kill a monster instead of having to use Blessings. And then in scenario 2, we'll give one of these Thieves' Tools to Kira. Alright, so Lem's got a Thieves' Tools, which is fine. I don't think he needs Codex to pick up boons. That seems pretty lame. So what I'm going to do is I'll give him an Amulet of Life. He's got a pretty big hand size, 6. He's going to be holding on to a weapon, so it's effectively just 5. But having some healing and just having this card in your game is, I think, worth it compared to another Caltrops. So Valeros, kind of a shitty situation for him. He cannot get rid of items easily. So we're going to give him Crowbar, which he can recharge anytime he has to make a strength check. And then Thieves' Tools. And then Sione here. Oh, I'm actually out of Thieves' Tools, huh? Are there really only 4 Thieves' Tools in the game? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, there's only 4 total tools. Okay, so I could actually give 1 pair of Thieves' Tools to Sione and have Sejan only carry 1. And give him 2 Caltropses? I don't know if that's smart. God, I just hate these starting items so much. Alright, fine, we'll do it. We'll give him 2 Caltrops. Let's have all the Caltrops in the party and make sure that Sione's got Thieves' Tools. We'll give her the Amulet of Life. And then the other thing for her, I'm going to give her this Sage's Journal. She's got a pretty big hand size. She doesn't mind hanging on to this to make her checks against henchmen and villains better. And at the end of the day, she can always burn it into a fireball. Potion of Glibness, pointless because she's good at diplomacy. Potion of Fortitude, pointless because there's not that many Fortitude checks. Potion of Hidings you could choose as a kind of metagame pickup in scenario number 1, because there is one location that is closed via stealth check. But I did give her the invisibility spell, so she can use this to close the wooden bridge or whatever that is in the first scenario. So we were on items for Sione. Let's make sure I haven't forgotten anybody. Nope, everybody's good. Everybody's good. Okay, so next up is allies. So for allies, I typically do prefer these, the ones that add a d6 to one of 2 different non-combat checks. I feel like that's just the best thing to have. I don't know if she really wants a standard bearer, though. I'd rather give her a sage for recharging her cure. For Sione, she has a lot of allies. So they gave her a guard, which is interesting. She can turn him into a fireball or banish him to reduce someone's damage. I don't think this is actually that smart because I can burn anybody into a fireball, and I'd rather have someone who can give me an extra exploration. Burglars, helping against barriers, I'd rather rely on Thieves' Tools for that. He does not give extra explorations. I don't know why they gave her a guide. I guess they just needed to put the guide somewhere, because this is obviously just horrifically terrible, so no need for that. We'll give her, wow, we have a lot of standard bearers here. Give her a standard bearer and a couple of troubadours. I wish she already has two troubadours. Yeah, we'll save a troubadour for Sejan. Let's give her a couple another standard bearer, I guess. Nah, that seems fine. All right, so for Valeros, don't really need the Night's Watch. Doesn't even have the perception skill. So we'll give him a troubadour as well. I want all the troubadours to be in here. They give charisma and dexterity, so they're pretty useful for a lot of different location closing checks. We'll give Lam. I just don't see him needing this because his strength and constitution are pretty low. We'll give him a sage. And then I'll give the last troubadour to Sejan. So I'm leaving a lot of standard bearers in the box. Not sure how much that's going to matter. But alright, I think that's everything. Everybody's got nothing but blessing of the gods. So that'll do it for this video. Thank you so much for checking it out. I hope you enjoyed it. And now we're going to go ahead and fire up the next video and play the first scenario, Brigand Doom, with this party. I'll see you very shortly.